Hey everybody, just a quick ultra lo-fi pre-intro. I am in a hotel. I'm in Ryan's hotel room in New Haven for the ALSCW conference, and that's why this is a day late. But it is a really good episode, and I should have a Secret Show episode up for you as well relatively soon. Brian Broger, if you're listening, I finally printed out your fucking E.A. Robinson essay, and it's really good so far, and I look forward to reading the rest of it. With luck, I will get you on the show before too long. Now, here is your intro music. Enjoy the show. I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to Slee Rickets. Thank you all for listening. I'm going to go quick with this intro because I have a bunch of packing still to do, and I've got my tried and true frozen pizza ready to burn in the oven downstairs method for keeping myself from running over. So I do want to thank all of you for listening, all of you for subscribing. If you go to the Secret Show at sleerickets.secret, sorry, Jesus fucking Christ. I'm so tired. If you go to sleerickets.substack.com, you will find the Secret Show. You can sign up there for free and get samples, or you can get a whole shitload of extra episodes if you've run out and you want to hear more. I know some of you have recently are new and are starting at the beginning, and Godspeed to you. I wish you luck. But at any rate, this week I have the long-awaited conversation with Amit Majmudar about his essay in the LARB recently. Essay on repetition? Yeah, essay on repetition in the Los Angeles Review of Books, which is a lot weirder and more entertaining than the title might initially lead you to believe. We also, though, while I had him on the line, talked about arrogance, and specifically the arrogance of poets, including him and me. And it was a pretty it was like a surprising, fun, strange conversation. This is the conversation in which he blew my mind about the Bhagavad Gita and just completely changed my perspective on that. But as I said, I'm going to keep it short. This is Amit Majmudar on essay on repetition and a bunch of other things. And I hope you enjoy.
Maybe, when we say about logic, I probably do concern myself more with that than maybe some of our contemporaries, simply because I like it when things make sense. And as soon as you want things to make sense, you are always going to have some element of, this leads to that. And you're not going to be doing the Ashbury thing where you switch pronouns in mid-sentence. And because you don't really care whether it makes sense or not. And you're not going to do the thing where it's just like, I'm going to string together completely disjointed images and then act as though it's a whole. That's not the kind of poetry that I like to read.
Right.
And I see no reason to write it. And frankly, I don't even know how in style or in vogue that stuff is anymore. It had its heyday a little bit a while ago. And I don't even think, I don't even know what I'd be gaining if I did, do the inauthentic thing, Right. Because for me, that would be inauthentic. It would be inauthentic for me to write something that was devoid of logic. And even within the individual verse paragraphs of the verse essay on repetition, within those verse paragraphs, there is a sense. There's logic within that. And although I kind of think of it, when I composed it, it was very much had an element of musical extemporization to it, where I was, there's a lot of like really elaborate couplet, like rhymes at the end of some of those lines.
Oh yeah.
Like not typical rhymes that you would do. And a lot of that is extemporization of,
Syllable and
you know.
unkillable. I don't usually get excited, but that was pretty good. Like that,
Yeah, and there's like
yeah.
stanza lion and dandelion and
Yeah,
just like
yeah,
random stuff.
yeah. You rhyme karma with two separate words. I forget at some point, and like yes, something. Yeah. No, I mean
Yeah,
yeah. It's
so yeah, I
inventive and
mean,
fun on that level. You know.
yeah, it's there's definitely musical improvisation, and I don't even know I don't even know like how I do that, to be honest with you. Like I can't necessarily rationally describe to you the process by which that happens, because there was no point, like literally seconds before I rhymed that, there was not a situation where I was like, I want to rhyme those two words. Like that's not,
Oh no, of
it's
course,
very
yeah.
strange. It's a very strange process. The compositional process is very mysterious to me, and I don't know how that works.
Well, you say, I mean, you say a couple things about it that because there's another, like there's a larger theme I want to get at some point. But
Sure.
like before we talk abstractly about this too much, do you want to just read some of this so listeners can get a little bit of it in their ears? I'm trying to find a. I mean, you.
Give me a passage that you think would be good.
How about the second verse? What do you call those, by the way? Verse paragraphs?
I just call them verse paragraphs. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe the second verse paragraph, which is kind of it opens with this scene. Because you have a
Yeah.
little introductory meditation, and then you go to this specific
Right.
scene, and then later we have a separate scene that lines up
Right.
next to it.
Which is like a mirror image of that, which is kind of like a repetition of it.
Yeah, yeah. They're
Yeah.
two kisses, two like
Right.
adolescent or early,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Two
early
first
loves.
kisses. Exactly. And like, and before that, immediately before that, I talk about the verse essay itself, and I say how like, I talk about how the presiding spirit of this verse essay, which is not particularly the most romantic type of poem, is going to be the muse of love poetry. So I say,
Yeah,
didactic poems simply aren't written. I know. Erato, help me, I am smitten. Erato, help me, make my hand your glove and shape this essay as a poem of love. And then I switch to that. And then I seg to that particular scene that you're talking about, which sounds like this. Go back then to the stacks, that reckless kiss, wet-lipped, wide-eyed. I gazed at Aeschylus, book lust and lust coupled in that moment. My eyes, my hands were roving, seeking Romans and Greeks, lobe reds, lobe greens, like Christmas in the mind. First kiss. Her incandescent skin flickers and dims, but I resist revision. I know the lobes were not my own tradition, and she was white. It wasn't meant to be. Or should I write, she wasn't meant for me? Enough to place them there. The books, the lover, between the shelves, two secrets to uncover. My love of literature and love of sex, a mutually overwritten text from then on. So you see why, since the age of 14, I've felt gooseflesh on the page. I often say that books are where I've sought truth. Truth is, I love them as I love my hot youth.
so like I guess part of what I did find striking about the shift, at least on the first read from prose to verse, is that I'm with you. I'm with you 100% in far preferring sense-making poetry to. I've been in a big argument with Alice and Cameron and Shane about this recently, but I find myself the stick in the mud when it comes to wanting to have some sense of not just like what happened, like how meaning remains consistent line to line, but also like why the poet might have chosen this versus that, which in an Ashbery poem becomes an impossible question.
Right.
But I also think that can be a little bit of a straw man because like your sentences make sense. It's not, even when I marvel at a moment of invention, I usually can think about why you might have chosen this. I'm seldom am I just sort of left totally puzzled. But the prose section of this essay, and I guess I still think of it as like one larger essay, but the prose introduction has a sense that you are sitting down to get to a point. You have a purpose to achieve, and maybe that purpose is just introducing this verse piece adequately. But
Right.
but there is a sense of a forward direction, an arrow. Whereas as
Mm-hmm.
soon as we step into verse, it starts to feel like this sort of cyclic, like you're spiraling towards something, but you're no longer proceeding towards it.
Right.
And
Right.
here as well, it's
It jumps back. It jumps
yeah,
back.
it jumps backward in time, and it's clear that you are like there is some sort of, even if it's just loose in the moment of composition, some scheme of setting up themes, setting up
Yeah.
an image versus another image. But then I think like it's these little moments inside of it that are, I think, most affecting. I stumbled initially over this bit. I know the lobes were not my own tradition, and she was white, it wasn't meant to be, or should I write, she wasn't meant for me. And I know, having spoken to you before, you have like a deep devotion to and involvement in a number of literary traditions that
Mhm.
obviously go outside of wherever
Yeah.
your own personal experience or family experience or nationality, like all of that.
Right.
What the only boundary is language, as
Right.
I know is how you think of it. But it's part of why I find this, like, I think if we were reading this logically, this would be a really disturbing moment, right?
Right.
Like that's a really heavy
I think
comic
that's why
slice,
I
and she,
put Stephen. I'm totally with you on that
yeah.
point that you're making, and that's why I put own in sort of
Oh
scare.
yeah,
Right?
but
Yeah.
that's part of what I find affecting about this is that
Yeah.
it reveals the 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 illogical logic of like adolescent thought, or like like
Mhm.
there's she was white, it wasn't meant to be, which of course isn't a larger statement about like miscegenation, but it's a moment
Mhm.
of like something in yourself or something in your own experience or something like, well, I guess in my own life this is how this happened, and you have that correction, or should I write, it wasn't meant, she wasn't meant for me. But
Right.
rather than being if this were really sort of a work of logic, then you would say, all right, well, what is the point I'm trying to get to, and what can I shave off in order to get there as
Mhm.
cleanly as possible. Whereas you have these little stumbles and corrections and repetitions and moments of reflection that to me have like far more accurately get at experience. And that's where I guess I think of that as being like a much more effective lyric than logical argument.
Right. And if you look at like an Alexander Pope verse essay, like I actually reread Pope's essay on man after I wrote this because I
Hmm.
didn't want to get too
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Didn't want to imitate
influenced
too
by
much.
him. And then what I noticed when I was reading Alexander Pope's essay on man is that he is very, it's a very austere style that he has evolved where he doesn't talk about himself one bit. And so the introduction of autobiographical material at all is right off the bat unpopian,
Yeah.
and Pope is he's just, I mean, there are some other places where he kind of talks to his friends and and even that, but he doesn't talk about himself, he doesn't talk about his past, he doesn't talk about any of that. In Pope, in Pope, it's very, he literally, in each one of his little subsections of the essay on man, like he has a philosophical prose summary of the idea that he's going to get across. And so what I've written in this essay is it's Alexander Popish in the sound of it. All
Hmm.
right. And if it tracks very closely, like the heroic couplet is practiced the way Alexander Pope practiced it.
So yours are not as
To a certain
closed
extent.
as his are. His tend to be very closed.
His are very closed. Mine are, I have a lot of runs of
Oh
closed
yeah.
ones. Yeah, there's a lot of runs of closed ones.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so there are a lot of passages where the couplet is practiced in Pope's manner. However, the substance of it is not very Alexander Popian at all, because there's two main differences. One is the exclusion of personal lyric elements, and the second thing is, as you're mentioning, a definite logical argument, a
Right.
specific logical argument, which can be paraphrased effectively at the outset, and it's almost as
Right.
though he's translating it into verse.
Yeah. This
And in
this
that
would not
sense,
paraphrase
yeah,
effectively.
it wouldn't paraphrase effectively, and then there's like a structural aspect of it that that is the result of the introduction of autobiographical material, where I have a repetition of two first kisses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which aren't necessarily aren't necessarily based in reality.
Well,
But,
you
yeah.
have a moment where you say like, I wouldn't make this up, which is like
Yes,
obviously a lie, but it's a sort.
I
It's
wouldn't
like
make this
you're
up.
invoking
I'm clearly
authenticity in
making
a
it
way
up.
that's like
Yeah.
clearly, it's a
Yeah, I even
rhetorical
talk
device.
about unless memory is what a memoir
Right.
crafts. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
is what I say. I say it that way at one point. So I'm clearly making it up.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's like these two first kisses, which are like parallelisms,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like, you know, the second one is a sort of uh, conceptualization of my real first kiss with my wife, who's upstairs
Right.
right
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, and but that first kiss did not happen in front of books or anything, you know.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
But in a conceptual sense, what is behind her is
It's Indian literature in that
our
case.
shared tradition. Okay,
Yeah.
our
Yeah. Yeah.
shared tradition is behind her, and so like
Yeah.
there I make it a metaphoric, like there I make it a literalization of what is behind her, which is like
Yeah.
all these books from like Hindu antiquity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so in that sense, it's quote unquote behind her. Um, so then that's then like mirrored with how the Loeb classics are behind this
The
other
white girl. Yeah.
hypothetical. Yeah, exactly.
It's. I think you're totally. I mean, obviously, the title essay on, and then you're right. Your argument sort of calls your shot in terms of imitating. I mean, you do even say, uh, oh shoot, where is it? There's a line where it seems very much that you look like Babe Ruth. To my knowledge, Pope has 0 imitators among the living major American or English poets, even the ones who do formal work. Parenthesis, except for fucking me, in about one more page. Yeah. I mean, it had like in that sense, it's very Popian. But you're right. Like the texture and the course of the poem itself are not very much like his essays on. What it totally reminded me of throughout, though, was Eloisa to Abelard.
You're
Which
right.
is
It does have
which
that. You're
blends
right.
like personal reflection and passion and lyric
Yeah.
with it does have a sort of an argument. I mean, she's not merely meditating on her own feelings. She does talk through the logic of some of how she's thinking about this relationship, but it never escapes the personal.
Right. I want to reread that now.
It's
I
one of my favorites. It's
Yeah,
really
I
one of
read
my
that years ago. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
so
yeah,
many years ago, like I was a teenager years ago.
yeah.
And so like I definitely want to reread that because I recently I audiobooked the letters of Abelard and Eloise,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Eloise or whatever, Eloise. And that's a crazy story. Oh
Holy
my
shit!
God.
Yeah, you know what?
Wow.
You know what is really, because I know you're like a history nerd too. If you have
Yeah.
not found, there's a I think you can just. I'll try to send you a link if you can online. You can find I think it's called the Historia Calamitatum.
Yes, that was part of the audiobook.
Oh
So
man,
it
that
had
is
their
fucking
letters. Yes.
Jesus.
Yes. It had the letters, and then it was a two-part audiobook. They had the letters, and then the second part of the audiobook was the Historia Calamitatum,
Oh my
which
god.
wow. You know, the thing is, like, I feel like that kind of stuff happens, you know, in some parts of the world even today, you know, where they
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's like, you know, but the thing is, like,
I mean,
um,
in many cases today, it would be far worse for her. I mean, because he's castrated, and they're both sent off to live.
yeah.
You know, but in many of the places in the world where that sort of thing would happen, the woman would come off
You're right.
in
In the
much
sense
worse shape.
they would like, you mean like kill her or something?
Yeah, I mean, kill her,
Yeah,
disfigure
kill
her.
some,
Yeah, right.
disfigure her or something like that. Yeah. So it is crazy, but also I think what makes it even what makes it very interesting to me was that, you know, when he wrote to her after his castration, all of a sudden, like, there's these letters where she's like really, really into him still, and she's like very passionate towards him, and then he writes back to her in this very, very like cold, moralizing way. And I was like, man, yeah, he has been castrated. Like, wow. So he's
Yeah.
undergone a change. He's undergone a real change. It's
The
just crazy story.
the version I read had some pretty good historical notes with it, and it made this sort of observation that I think like in in a couple of ways, I think today maybe it may be an American thing, but like the he gets in trouble for sleeping with a student when he's a monk,
Mm-hmm.
but the point that's made in the notes to the version I read was that neither his crime nor his punishment were at the time understood in quite as absolute terms as they might be today. That like he is, but like sexual impropriety or something where like we today in this country can't get over.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like that's a permanent mark in a way that you can't, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas you know, for him, there are other things that would have been worse, that would have more permanently marred his reputation. And likewise, you know, he certainly is expresses grief over his castration, but
Yeah.
far worse for him is the earlier punishment when he's forced to burn his own, like the one copy of a book that he's written,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
like a far deeper wound.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, it's but yeah, like for her, it's asymmetrical, and I think Pope's ventriloquization of her is really touching. I think in picking up
I'm
on
going to definitely reread that. One thing you know, that you bring up a good point, which is that in our time, sexual impropriety is unforgivable, kind of
yeah,
permanently marked. And I think that heresy is kind of like that, was kind of like that back in those days.
yeah,
And it's just interesting to see how values change in a society over time, where you and I right now could say anything we wanted to about Christian theology,
right,
and we'd get away with it, even though this is a Christian majority country.
yeah,
And yet, if either one of us was even accused of like groping somebody,
oh God, yeah,
it would
game
be
over, yeah,
it would be game over. And I don't know what you would do. I don't know what you would do in that situation. I mean, as a writer, I guess you would have to, I don't know, change your name, publish under a pseudonym. I
yeah,
mean, you'd have to do something like that and just start from zero. Like whatever you've published until now under your name is gone, and
yeah.
then you start from zero again. You know?
Oh yeah. So this gets to another theme of this essay that at least it was a theme I was really interested in. I did want to see if so the stanza or the paragraph that immediately follows that first scene of the kiss before the books with the white girl and the nominally white, but I mean it's calling like ancient Greeks of various denominations all white seems a little bit blurry.
I have an interesting dialogue. I want to send you a link about that.
Oh yeah,
Me and a buddy of mine, who's also very, you know, devoutly Hindu.
yeah,
He studied the classics in college, like meaning he studied Greek,
yeah,
and everything, and super erudite guy, and he's an attorney, and in California, and basically, you know, me and him and a few other guys, like we're always on like Signal chat together talking about random stuff. Anyway, we did this whole dialogue about whether the classics are white or not, you know?
yeah,
And we just let loose. We just talked about, it's a written dialogue, and
Right, yeah.
so it's published. You can find it online. I'll actually send it to you. And like, we go in depth on that question.
Yeah.
And,
They were plenty
yeah.
racist, too, as with like even like
No, I mean,
19th
long
century
story
Europe. Like
short,
they were
they're
very
not-
racist against each other. Like it was
Yeah,
with
yeah,
it. Like whiteness is a it's a construct clearly, but yeah, it's a,
yeah. What? Oh no. I mean, I think I think that it's a garbage idea to basically claim that the classics, the Greek and Roman classics, are white. I mean, so does he. So does we both do, and neither of us is white. We technically don't have a dog in this fight, you know. But we just, you know what I'm saying? Like we don't have some ethno-racial attachment to that tradition. We love the tradition. Both he and I adore that tradition.
Right, yeah.
With,
you have a human attachment to it. You have a linguistic
you have human attachment to it.
undeniably, yeah.
So it's not a tribalist. It's not a tribalist kind of thing where we're like, no, the classics aren't racistly bad. No, we're just literally like, this is a category error. It is a form of historical myopia, myopia, and it does not bear up under investigation. It's objectively assessed. This is not an appropriate way to characterize the classics. But yes, sorry,
Oh no, I mean, yeah,
digression. Yes.
yeah, and I know uh, that is a topic of a lot of debate in classics departments right now. I'm not as in the know in that, but I know that
Yeah,
like
I mean,
there's a
I'm just glad
there's a
I'm
weird
glad I'm
interest
not
in
part of
like
that world, because I would end up getting excommunicated because of
yeah, you would get in a
my
lot of
frank
trouble.
contempt for
That's
that way.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's a place where maybe heresy could get you in trouble.
Yeah,
Of a different
I
kind.
think, there's, Umberto Eco talks about how the universities in the modern day are the equivalent of the monasteries in
Yeah.
medieval times. And so that's why like heresy is a thing in academia.
Oh yeah.
Heresy is a thing. You can get defenestrated, you can get excommunicated
Right.
for thinking the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing, publishing the wrong thing. You can be made to retract. You can have struggle sessions, all those types of things. It's something that happens when there's a high degree of conformity, ideological conformity, or any type of conformity like that. And then your conformity is the currency. It's a currency that allows you to arise within that hierarchy,
Yeah.
And so hierarchical systems with strong emphasis on conformity, that's monastery, university is very similar.
Yeah. And it may be my own obsession, but I tend to think about like I have some affiliation with the ALSCW, which is had some ups and downs in recent years. But the old joke that Alicia Stallings made to me about it when she first introduced the idea, she said the ALSCW is like the MLA for people who like books, and it I think gets it like I think it is much easier for something like an English department to become dogmatic and brittle and at risk of intellectual conformity when it becomes more and more removed from pleasure. Either like pleasure in the original text or even like pleasure in a beautiful or elegant or a funny argument, that when it becomes obsessed with some sort of rigid correspondent notion of truth, I think that's where that's where this sort of way of thinking can thrive. Whereas I think if you're always having to go back to contact with the text, contact with actual enjoyment in what you're doing, then I think it's a little bit harder because you can have somebody with a strange set of ideas can still cause enjoy, can show you a new way to enjoy something, or it can be entertaining.
I think the other element to remember, for me at least, when I think about it, is competition or hierarchy and competition.
Oh God,
yeah. Once you have that in play, people are going to try to find ways to sink each other, and you can get rid of a rival by accusing them of wrongthink. You're going to do that because they create artificial, like maybe it's not artificial, maybe it's true scarcity of attention, scarcity of prestige. That's why they don't give out 100 Pulitzer Prizes in poetry a year. They have to keep that scarce. There can only be one. And this holds true of everything. And they try and mitigate that a little bit by releasing a long list for the National Book Awards, and then a short list, and then the one. But everyone wants to be the one. You want to be the one. And so they create a commodity, and then they keep it artificially scarce. And in that context, once you do that, then everyone's competing for it, and then you kind of have to elbow the next guy to get yours. And that's that. Once that comes into play, all sorts of things open up. In the old monasteries, everyone wanted to be the big dog. Everyone wanted to come to the attention of Rome, come to the attention of the bishops and cardinals, and then be elevated and get to the next stage in the church hierarchy, right? And there were ways to do that, and conformity was one. And then accusing the other guy, your rival, that he believes that the son and the father are not of one flesh, or something random like that. and then you kind of just stab that guy, and you're the one who ends up, getting the goodies.
Yeah,
So
and you get further and further away from what was ostensibly the goal of the whole enterprise.
right, no, absolutely. And I think back in old Europe, I think that it was something of a career for, like, the church was a career for a lot of people.
Oh yeah,
So
I
it
mean, well,
wasn't
that's so
necessarily,
clear with Abelard. Like he's a
yeah,
brilliant scholar, and like this is
yeah.
the way you have that career.
Right, right. And I think that even to opt for that as a career over, say, law or medicine or
Yeah,
whatever else they did back then, you have to have a kernel of love. And so even the most, for example, like the person, like if I were a classicist spouting the few things that I just said to you a little bit ago, and then people, the classicists who tried to cancel me over that,
right.
they would have entered that field with a kernel of love for the old Greeks and Romans,
Right.
same as me.
Yeah,
It's just that in the course of that process, it gets grisly.
yeah. The pursuit takes on a life of its own.
Ambition corrupts.
Yeah. So this is actually very relevant to the other big thing I wanted to talk with you about. Would you read the paragraph that immediately follows the one you just read about that
Sure.
that first kiss? So it's I often say that books are where I've sought truth. Truth is, I love them as I love my hot youth. You also, as with Pope, you have a sweet tooth for some juicy feminine rhymes in here. So yeah, just follow. Just pick up right after that if you would.
Yeah, here we are. Desire was the heart of it, of course, the set theme and variation that condensed that wet dream of twinned success in love and literature. I manage it these days. There is no cure for it, this twinging of the psyche's knee. I've read Girard. I know it isn't me desiring what I want. My first ambition in letters, execute a repetition of Shakespeare's oeuvre. I wrote blank verse plays before I had my driver's license. Days spent making, botching, each poetic move the master made. What was I out to prove? Why did I want so fiercely to become him? I craved his title. There was only one him, but I was sure that I would be the second. Or was my Mises how the muses beckoned me onward, coaxing me with my ambition to master verse through slavish repetition? My Mises at its core is me. That's why imitation has to start with I.
Do you know the Anthony Hecht poem "A Letter"?
I may have read it, but I don't
Yeah,
remember.
I think it's in the Hard Hours. It's a love poem, but he had early on he has this line, I try my best to continue as before, and it's the point of the whole poem is that there is no getting over this sort of broken affair that he had, and it sort of consumes his whole life, and that I manage it these days. I heard that same sentiment there. So you were in your earlier appearance, you were truly one of my most quietly controversial guests. Like most people I heard from were very enthusiastic. I know Ethan McGuire, I think you've interacted with on Twitter before. He's like, oh, Majmudar is my favorite poet. This is great.
Nice. Thank you.
A smaller but notable number were furious with you, but not because of anything you said, and not in disagreeing with anything you said, and not even in disapproval of any of your writing. That it was interesting because it was not a, they didn't think you were wrong about anything, and they didn't think your work was not good, but they thought you were arrogant.
Oh.
And I totally
No.
I totally sympathize with this though, because I feel like it's impossible to write poetry without some significant arrogant impulse. And like this, I sympathize so much with this paragraph because I think I obviously, as you get into it, it takes on a life of its own, and you don't remember necessarily the very first impulse, but I definitely for many, many years this was my goal to do Shakespeare's plays, to write, to not just to do good work, but to do capital G great work. I mean, like that's the drive. Like in a way, I don't really understand doing it without that drive. And I talked with Alice a little bit with this recently, like, among poets, we'll all very frequently make fun of ourselves or joke about not being Rimbaud or not being Keats, or that, I was talking to Cameron about Rimbaud the other night. And that's all true, and it all is. It's as the I sent you the Thomas Nagel piece. I think like he's right in that it's probably healthy to view ourselves with some irony and to laugh at ourselves some, but I never feel as if, like, in those conversations where people say like, oh well, we're nothing great, we're just doing our little work, and I never feel totally comfortable, because part of me thinks like, well, if we're not going to, if there's no chance that we're going to be doing great work, if there's no chance that like I could still write something really significant, then why the fuck don't I just blow my brains out? Like it's to me, I can't ever totally let go of that drive. And so in a way, my response is like, well, if you don't have some arrogance, like if you're not really in it to win, like if you're not in it, not just to win or be the number one or be the best, but like if you're not in it to do really great work, then why do it at all? Like, how can you stand it?
Yeah. And, I think that the classical tradition is really good about this, because it talks about, there's this unbroken chain from the antiquity all the way to like Napoleon and Milton and Napoleon of glory. Okay. Yeah. Of glory and the pursuit of glory. And the pursuit of glory relates directly to the glory of people who were glorious before you. And so, I think it was the Battle of Austerlitz. There's this anecdote about Napoleon, and he's, the battle wasn't necessarily going that great. I don't know if that was the exact battle, but one of those battles. And there's this anecdote that someone wrote about, like someone saw Napoleon on the battlefield, and he's like all this gun smoke, smoke everywhere. He's the literal fog of war, and he's screaming at the enemy, "I am Charlemagne, I am Charlemagne." Oh my God. Okay, and that's Napoleon, right? Yeah. And if you look at Milton, right? So Milton writes this epic, Paradise Lost, but in his 20s he wrote this manuscript where he just laid out a bunch of ideas, and it wasn't like he was he wasn't like, oh, the gods have determined that I shall write Paradise Lost to justify God's ways to man. He was just as willing to write a play. He was just as willing to write about Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, because that's what Spencer had written about. And he basically was just looking for the theme, the subject, the form that he was then going to become Virgil with. Right. He's going to become, whoever. And so when Milton was in the middle of writing, Paradise Lost, that was his way of shouting, "I am Virgil." That was his "I am Charlemagne," right? His equivalent was "I am Virgil." And I think there's also a story in the classical world about like Caesar turning 33 or something, or one of those guys turns 33 and he thinks about what Alexander did by the time he was 33. He's like, he conquered the world and died, and I've done nothing, Right. I don't know which one of those guys it was. I think it was Caesar. Right. But anyway,
and Augustus took Caesar's name. I mean, was adopted by him posthumously, but also took his name deliberately to say like, "Oh, I'm Caesar."
Yeah, and then that holds true all the way to Kaiser Wilhelm.
Right. Yeah.
Kaiser means Caesar.
Yeah,
Czar means Caesar. Yeah. And it's all about looking at all the glorious people of the past and then being like, "I'm Charlemagne." Yeah. And when you write, there is this sort of, you have to have that conviction of in yourself, and conviction and belief, and that can be a turnoff to people who are insecure. And
I like. All right, shots fired. All right, I like that.
No, I mean, look,
if you found Amit Majmudar arrogant, then he's got words for you.
You know what? It's kind of like, if it is, it can be perceived as arrogant, I guess, but that's sort of like a prerequisite to the moment of writing. Now, if I carry that accidentally out of my, my zone, like when I'm in my zone, I want to be like that. I don't want to be like that outside of my zone. And I think most people who know me would not necessarily characterize me like that. I know my people who know me best would not, but and the flip side of that is that self-criticism, right? Like, so I'm the biggest enemy of my own work. Like I've gotten negative reviews over the years for various books, prose, poetry, or whatever, but none of them have ever said anything as bad about my work as I thought and said about my own work. And there's entire books, like I can't even touch my own books. I published like a bunch of books at this point. I can't even look at them sometimes. Like, and there's entire manuscripts that I have that I don't even send out because I'm like, that's not good enough. So I mean, so I guess the flip side of the in the zone arrogance or ego expansiveness or whatever you want to think of it as, the I am Charlemagne aspect of when I'm in the writing zone is the fact that I'm also shouting I am dirt. I'm an earthworm at the same time. As soon as I get out of that zone. So I'm actually, maybe that, those two extremes are only there for my literary life for the most part, in my day-to-day life, I'm very, very level and like not like that and not extreme in any way, really, to be honest with you. But when it comes to my literary life, like when I'm in the zone, I'm like intensely one way. And then when I'm outside the zone, analyzing what I've written, I'm kind of like down on myself a lot. So it's kind of a mix, I guess.
Oh no! When I think that like there is this funny combination of a healthy arrogance and a very limited pride with that is important because I think pride can be deadly when it comes to poetry because the same. Pride is what keeps you from saying, "Oh, no, this was not good enough. I'm going to throw all this out." Like the arrogance is the same impulse that says, "Like I'm going to dismiss all this. I'm not going to keep this. I'm not going to publish this because even if it's good enough, it's not good enough for me."
Right. That's a good point. That's funny. It's kind of like a form of arrogance where you're like, this work is not worthy of my name. It's kind of like, it's kind of a snootiness towards your own productions. Right. But that actually probably helps vet things a little bit,
Oh yeah.
I know. I think there's poets like I think Elizabeth Bishop, Frost. I think they have like they didn't publish as much as they wrote. Like there's a lot of writers like that, and some of them have like very, very small amounts of work that they publish. But there's like all these stuff that
Eliot, Hausman, Larkin. Yeah. Oh yeah, Bishop certainly. Yeah, and I think you're very right that there is something like the difference between. It's like what's the generalized versus acute anxiety. Like generalized arrogance is leads to like tyranny, like Donald Trump. I don't know, but I think like you're there. That you hear about serious competitive athletes and the stuff they'll have in their headphones when they're about to go on to play, or the kind of their pep talks to themselves. There was a story I remember hearing. I used to dabble in the fashion world some, and I had a former schoolmate who briefly was a model for Gucci, and there's a story I heard about. There's this woman whose whole job was to give the pep talk to the male Gucci models right before the show. And it was this sort of like, it was like, you are Charlemagne. It was like, you are the hottest 10 guys in Italy. Every fucking woman out there wants to fuck you. I want to fuck you. You're going to go murder every one of them. They're not worthy of you. And you just give them this insane speech, which of course, like, taken out of that context is nightmarish, but it's like you can't do certain things unless in that moment you believe something impossible.
Yeah, and I think thoughts matter. Thoughts matter, and what you tell yourself matters, and mindset matters, and that you can't. you have to be able to hopefully quarantine that, though, in your life, so that the people around you don't have to put up with that. And I think that from what I've seen of, like, or what I've read rather, of like toxic artist types, like,
Yeah.
what happens is that there's a like a firewall that breaks, like basically the quarantine, the way they are in the zone. When they're in the zone, it like bleeds over into how they are at other times in their lives. And then that's got to be a pain to live around, I can only imagine.
No,
Because
yeah, it's
yeah.
deadly. But you're toxic is the right word for
Yeah,
it.
so when you read these biographies of like great artists who like just treat the people around them like crap, I often think that that self intensity, that intensity of that arrogance of I can do this or I can do that, it then tramples over other people around them. So it's very important to have that insight and then to kind of cordon it off.
Yeah. Yeah. No, right. And I mean, and the same, like, I think, like, the same way that you can have a hunger for greatness and therefore have a dissatisfaction with anything less than that. I think you need to have that ability with your own personality to say,
Right.
like, I can laugh at this other thing from here when I'm doing, like, I mean, and there's nothing as humbling as like having kids or having a spouse who can put you in your place. But then, like, when the door is shut and I'm in this room, then I put on my Napoleon hat, or my, yeah. So yeah, I had like some sort of silly thoughts or observations. I have a partly because I've like looked at and listened to and gotten, there was that frustrating Adam Gopnik piece on rhyme, and I've been thinking about rap, and I'm going to be talking to a rapper soon for the show, and looking at spoken word and stuff. I've gotten really interested in distinctions between different kinds of preferences in rhyme. And my rule of thumb has been that typically with, like, there's no good words for formalist or like the post new formalist, whatever, like the camp I generally associate with page poetry, and even like you won the Justice Prize some years ago, and that, like, that whole world. My association, generally speaking, is that if you're going to choose a slant rhyme, then generally that camp tends to favor consonant slant rhymes, whereas spoken word rap, song, like singer songwriters, often use slant rhymes, but they tend to be assonant. And here, I thought, interestingly, I found one. I could have missed it, but I thought I found one consonant slant rhyme, which was frantic and inauthentic. But other than that, I think you had a lot, but they were almost, I think they were, apart from that, I think they were all assonant rhymes. So encore with concord, Eden with beating. There's your, yeah, every 10th beats charm, concurrence fortunate as instant karma. That's that, which is a true rhyme, but yeah, like you have mostly assonant slant rhymes throughout, and then you had this line that made me think, like, oh, is this a declaration of is this like a little ars poetical statement? You say, because it isn't rhyme if it isn't heard. And of course, assonant rhyme lands in the ear more strongly than consonant rhyme does. Is this conscious? Is this deliberate? Is this specific?
No, it's not conscious, but you bring up an excellent point.
Okay.
An excellent point. No, I mean, awesome analysis, I guess. You taught me something about myself just now. Yeah, 100%. No, that's actually very true. But I do believe that it isn't rhyme if it isn't heard. I do believe that in an objective sense. Like, it's not a rhyme if you didn't hear it. And like, I know I think it was Paul Muldoon or somebody, or someone was writing about him or something, who was like, he rhymed 16 lines later. or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And I'm like, that doesn't count. That's not a
Yeah,
rhyme.
somebody who said of him he could rhyme cat with dog because he like a lot of his rhymes are sort of high conceptual rhymes, or
Right,
as
high
you said, they're
conceptual
so
ones.
far
But this one
apart
was
that you
like it was like a hard rhyme, but it was like
yeah
16 lines apart. And I'm like, no, at that point you haven't heard it. It's not really a rhyme, you know?
yeah yeah.
So I do believe that it isn't rhyme if it isn't heard. Yeah. I I,
All right,
I
all
do
right.
think that.
So you
And
disapprove of Larkin's rhyming kids with diaphragm and in line windows?
no, no. I like every type of rhyme, to be
Yeah
honest with
yeah.
you. It's just
Um,
in this particular piece, I think it was very phonetically or musically composed. So I
mhm.
probably naturally gravitated towards that. But I've used plenty of consonantal rhyme, and I sometimes I've written poems where I rhymed antonyms and stuff like that. And like
Mhm.
I like it all, to be honest with you.
Yeah
There's
yeah yeah.
nothing that I won't try or won't try and you know, get something like or do something with. So I think that consonantal rhyme is beautiful. And who used it very well was Robert Pinsky in his translation of the Inferno. If
Oh,
I
I don't know that.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think he does some good work with that particular
Okay.
thing, if I recall.
All right. I'll have to
Again, it's been years since I read that version.
Um, yeah, no, I have not. I haven't. I think I have a copy of it somewhere. It's like
I think he's
there's certain books like
making
Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet and the Inferno where you end up with like 17 copies over the course of your
How
like,
does that
what?
happen? How does that happen?
Yeah,
They breed. They breed.
yeah, I know exactly. All right, okay. The one I just because I'm on the same page, I'm looking at it. One line I think I understand and I can make a stab at, but I also just want to hear you elaborate. You
Mm-hmm.
have because you do like what is very Popian is you get a lot of these little one line declarations that then you like move on to something else. But one
Yeah.
you make here is you say because some artists make and some restore, and you say and there's an equal love and either's brush and equal rush. But then I want to say, wait, elaborate. Wait, so okay, so
Oh
how do you
yeah.
mean exactly? What does that mean? Some artists make and some restore.
Well, I think that like it's like painting, like restoration of painting, and like that person does a lot of work, puts in a lot of work, and basically, if you just looked at them doing their work, it would look a lot like painting something, but they're restoring a piece. Sometimes they're taking away to reveal what was always there. And I think that like criticism can be a form of art. I think of that sometimes when I read George Steiner, um, where you're peeling away, almost interpretation can be an art. And and I think in that particular line or couple lines there, I think I was getting at the idea that that in itself is a form of repetition, where um, whether it's restoring a work of art that someone else has made, like the way a painting restorer does, it's almost as though you're recapitulating that creative process by thinking about what the original conception was or what the original execution was. And so in that sense, it's a retread or recapitulation of that artistic moment. And I guess I don't necessarily say this, but in my head, I also think that like interpreting a poem or interpreting a work is also a form of repetition of that work, if only in your mind. But even sometimes, you know what? A lot of times, if a critic is interpreting lines, they'll write the lines out. That too is a form of repetition. Um, so yeah, I think that's those are just the kind of random thoughts that I'm having as I ponder those lines. But I think that that's probably why I didn't unpack it, where I feel like it works better in its own kind of verse form rather than me
Yeah, yeah,
shooting
yeah.
from the hip. You know what
Oh,
I'm
it's I
saying?
mean, yeah, it's aphoristic, and you have the I think you have you written like collected aphorisms because I was gonna say like you seem like the kind of poet who could or would do aphorisms.
Don Patterson does that a lot, or did
Yeah.
that a lot, but I have not actually done that. But I think that very naturally, like my style tends to be like that. I know that
Yeah.
when I was very young, when I first was getting into literature, I was very much into Nietzsche, as many
Yeah,
young
yeah,
men
yeah,
are. But like,
yeah,
I wasn't into him for his ideas. I was into him for his style. You know,
yeah,
like I just loved his style, and I was like, I don't necessarily agree with a lot of the things that he's saying, but if I
sure.
wrote philosophical prose, God, I would want it to sound like this. And if I wrote sentences, I want them to sound like this. I was reading them in translation, actually, Walter Kaufman's translation.
Yeah, yeah.
It was one of my really early prose and technically poetic influences too. Was the
Right, yeah,
Kaufman
yeah, because the
Technic
gay science has all that poetry in it. Yeah.
yeah, but not even the gay science, but a lot of Beyond Good and Evil and on the
I haven't read that
genealogy
one.
of morals. Like again, not the ideas,
Right.
the way that he wrote really impressed me when I was young.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't, I mean, I definitely don't read him in order to like receive like
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 yeah, wisdom.
principles or concepts, but I think like it's both the style and the like the model for a way of looking at things. Like not that I imitate him or want, but like I just find like it's always instructive to listen to a great mind articulate a vision of things, even if it's a vision I reject.
Mm-hmm,
It's
mm-hmm.
I find it useful to hear fully articulated a way of looking at the
No, I
world.
love that. I love that about you, and I love that. I love that. I love that particular outlook because no, that's the supremely humanist outlook. Okay, so basically, I've approached literature like that because the treasures of the English tradition and of the Western tradition aren't necessarily consonant with my religious beliefs,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's inevitable that you have, like, I personally have to be like, okay, this particular writer would have condemned me to hell and my
Sure.
ancestors to hell for eternity
Yeah.
without for just because of our beliefs or whatever.
Yeah.
And yet this is an amazing work of art and I love it. And and I think that a lot of times people get wrapped up in the whole, you know, is this person good or bad? And therefore, can I like their work or not? And I'm so routinely accustomed to loving the work of people who would condemn me and my ancestors to hell for eternity that
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't necessarily even register that. I recently I recently read a biography of Byron, and it turns out that he was kind of a pedophile. He was, by modern
Jesus.
definition, he was a legit pedophile,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he literally went into the Ottoman Turks. Like, you couldn't do. I mean, first of all, he did stuff even within England or even within the UK.
Yeah.
But then the real market for that, for boys and whatever,
Right.
was over in the Ottoman Turkish
Right.
world, and
Like
he
he
literally
would have gone to Thailand today. Yeah.
yeah, he would have gone to Thailand today.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And basically I realized that, wow, I know this about him now, and yet I still love Don Juan, like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I could totally just pick up Don Juan right now and just vibe with it. And I love that book. I love that
Yeah.
that poem. And it didn't change anything. Because I thought he was just like a bisexual Casanova type,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
just
Yeah.
having sex
So
with a lot of
with
people.
with dabbling in incest. Yeah.
Yeah, a little dabbling in incest,
Yeah.
but other than that, I just figured he was just like, just really attractive and just
Right.
took
Yeah.
what was on offer.
Bulimic
But it wasn't
weirdo.
like
Yeah.
that. It wasn't like that. In fact, Percy Bysshe Shelley, like, documented about how he saw, how he observed Byron negotiating with a poor, destitute mother for the use of her
Oh
child,
Jesus.
like her daughter, basically. And
Yeah.
this is just, it's just sick. Like, he was a sick dude.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
He was diseased, and he was abused as a child. And there was, there's must have been a lot of psychiatric damage that he had.
Yeah.
And he had that foot and everything. But he was a damaged person who damaged other people. All right. He
Oh
damaged
yeah. Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
And yikes, he's a terrible person. And now I know maybe why he was so much in disrepute back in when in Victorian era,
Yeah.
like,
Mad, bad, and dangerous to know.
Mad,
Yeah.
Bad, and Dangerous to Know. But that was actually his contemporary, like, somebody who knew him at the time. But like, or no, that was that Mad Jack Byron? Anyway, but yeah, like, there's this scene in Joyce's Portrait of the Artist and the Young Man where, like, like these two, like somebody's like, it's just like a vague memory, but like somebody's getting beat up and they're like, say Byron is bad or something like that. But there was this disrepute, this sort of miasma of ill repute
Yeah.
that clung to him, which I just thought it was because they were straight laced, but
Right.
they didn't like a guy who could, who could be promiscuous in his own way.
Right.
But it turns out that he was genuinely rotten, but again, I still love his work. It is just what it is.
Oh yeah. No, certainly. Yeah, I think about that with and I am not able to have a poetic relationship to it because it's too distant linguistically. Though I still need to read your translation of the Gita. But like I reread the Bhagavad Gita recently, and it was not a great translation. I should read yours, which is God's song is how you translate the
Yeah,
title,
yeah,
which is I guess the song of the Lord. But yeah,
yeah, yeah.
but that's when I really struggle with, but I still find it useful to read because I think the and like not having a Hindu background, to me the center of it is this conflict, this brilliant warrior who doesn't want to slaughter his own family, and then
Mhm.
the idea that, of course, like being presented with that as a problem, as a dilemma, my sympathy is with that impulse. It's like, yeah, look, how about not shooting all of your uncles and your cousins? But
Yeah.
then the idea that it's like there would be a really like robust and like traditionally borne out and supported perspective that would say, actually, that is the small-minded view.
Hmm.
There is a greater way of looking at it in which that says, do your duty, follow your dharma, do the thing that you're. And I even thinking, like, I was listening to this chess teacher, and he was doing like a sample, he was doing a demo game with one of his students, and the student had a small mouse slip where he
Hmm.
moved the wrong piece, and the teacher said, "Oh, I think that was a mistake. Let me see if I can let him take it back. I can't let him take it back." And he said, "Well, clearly this was a mistake. Clearly he didn't mean to hang his queen, but he said, out of respect for the game, I'm going to take his queen anyway." And like even just like that little way of thinking, I thought like, oh, that's like a little echo of the Gita there. That I think like I don't like learn my worldview from it, but I'm really grateful to have been taught a way of looking out at things through that, through that way of thinking.
Yeah, the Gita's it's super
I know there's
deep.
a lot more to it than
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
but like,
There's a
yeah,
lot more to it, and it is best understood in the context of the epic of which it is a part.
right, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
so when Arjuna says, oh my God, those are my cousins and my uncles and this and that, it's not just those are my family members. Like there's a lot of history there,
yeah,
and
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
there's dynastic, there's a lot of history and a lot of attempts to find a reconciliation that avoided war, and so a lot of people don't realize this, but there's this climactic moment in the Gita where Krishna shows his universal form, right, and he shows his universal form to Arjuna,
Right, yeah,
which
yeah,
is sort of like even the cosmos on the universe and this and that and
yeah,
this and that, and that's in the 11th chapter. But a lot of people don't realize that in the epic, this is before the Gita begins, but in the epic Mahabharata that it's part of, he actually shows that universal form to one other person, which is the main guy on the other side. And he's doing
oh,
that when he goes into their kingdom, and he basically is trying to avoid war. And he says, look, there's these five brothers. They rightfully merit half the kingdom, but they're willing to settle for just five villages, one village for each one of them.
yeah,
And then the guy says, no, they get nothing. And then he basically tries to arrest Krishna. And then Krishna says, look, you don't know who you're dealing with. Let me show you.
right,
And he doesn't care. He doesn't recognize it. He doesn't
right,
recognize it for what it is. And so like that in itself is the endpoint of that encounter is
right,
the endpoint of something that involved like multiple assassination attempts. Like they basically And then they sent him into exile. They sent those brothers into exile. Before that, they tried to assassinate him by building a house and then setting it on fire. And then there's all this crazy stuff that leads up to that moment. And I think when people read the Gita completely like out of nowhere, they're basically like, but those are his family members,
right? Yeah.
But there's so much to it. There's so much to it, and that's why and that's why actually I wrote a version. I've written a version of the Mahabharata, and it's coming out in India next year. So 2023 is next year. Yes. So that's coming out. It's huge. It's actually 3 books. And I don't know if they've decided whether they're going to publish them in 3 volumes or just one big volume.
Right.
And the reason I did that is because I was getting ready to do this commentary on the Gita. And in the beginning, they have these like characters. And I was like, I want to know the backstories of each and every one of these characters completely.
Right.
And then I realized that this is the whole epic affects your reading of that Gita. And so in the epic, in my Mahabharata trilogy that I'm going to be publishing next year, I have an entire Gita that I've rewritten as a contemporary poem with the same number of lines, same number of verses, same number of chapters, same number of verses in each chapter, and same like ideas. Only it's not a translation. It's like a new poem.
Yeah.
And I insert that in there. The whole thing's in prose, but then I insert this Gita poem in it so that when you read that, like you have the whole context, everything that led up to it. And so that was my pandemic project.
Yeah.
That's what I did.
That's a pretty meaty one. I was going to say the whole Mahabharata.
No, it's a huge epic, but I made it readable. And people would be able to. And also what I did is it's actually out with publishers in America right now. I don't know if anyone's going to publish it, but it'll end up getting published. But anyway, I'm pretty sure it will. But anyway, it just may take a while. I also have a bunch of other books coming out next year, so it's going to have to be pushed back anyway.
Too many books. So
many books, so many books, so little time. But yeah, anyway, then I also made sure that for an American audience, because American audiences aren't familiar with the story the way that Indian audiences are. I break it up into little sections and I give you little summaries of the action, and I give you the list of characters who are introduced and who they are, so that you have like a handy reference. So if you see that guy, okay, what is that? Oh, okay, that's who that is.
Do you know the Pivar and Volokhonsky translations of Dostoevsky?
I audiobook Tolstoy and Dostoevsky.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah,
but they're just like, at least I have like the Everyman editions. They've done a few, but they always do a really good job of just like, they do a pronunciation guide, but they also they list all of the characters and just give little notes and little which also helps because they will list like all of the different names that the characters are called over the course of the novel.
Stefanovich.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes called that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I could definitely with a huge book like that, I can imagine that would be very helpful. But that's fascinating because what you're saying is like, I've always thought of the Arjuna Krishna debate as being like I thought of Arjuna as being like a Jesus or a Gandhi, kind of like merciful. But what you're describing is more like Arjuna is Neville Chamberlain and Krishna is Winston Churchill. Pacification is not going to work here.
Basically, remember, Arjuna is not like Jesus or Gandhi or anything.
No. Yeah, I mean, he doesn't have that greatness of vision. He's a small, but gentle might.
Yeah, no, he's a great archer. Like he's a killer. He's known to be like the supreme. Basically the supreme wielder of that weapon.
He's like Achilles with a conscience.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Achilles being considered the greatest warrior of that host. That Arjuna is that, but he's very, very he's a good guy. He's a good guy he's kind of like a hybridization of Achilles and Hector, if you think about it. Because Hector is a family man.
Hector's sort of the truly noble character, but yeah.
He's noble, and
But
Arjuna.
his nobility becomes a kind of a weakness ultimately.
Right. And so Arjuna is very noble and deeply thought and beloved of Krishna. And he's beloved of Krishna for a reason. He's not beloved of Krishna. Achilles would not be beloved of Krishna, right?
No.
Achilles is a kind of an asshole, but
Yeah.
but Arjuna is very, very he's lethal,
Yeah.
but he's also so he is a master of violence.
Right.
But he's also just a deeply thought character and an emotional character. And that's why when he's in that situation, it becomes, he loses his nerve. He loses his nerve.
Oh, I mean, in a way that's understandable. But this is the first time I realized, like, the argument I've always heard is that fulfilling his duty as the great archer is good because of dharma, because of like a larger cosmic lens. But what you're suggesting is like, it's not just that it's good, it's the greater good in the cosmic sense, it's the greater good in like the historical sense right now. Like it is better for him to like dispositively wipe out this host of fighters in this moment, because
which they've done a lot to avoid having to do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as with World War II, it's like, well, no, actually, this particular violence is the greater good because of what would happen otherwise.
It has historical / epic, within the epic justification, as absolutely true. Yeah. And that's probably the missing link. And talking with you makes me realize that, because I think that every Indian who reads the Gita has that in the back of their mind, that basically, he's up against Duryodhan and Dronacharya and all those names that I'm saying, like, they know who those are. They know who those guys are. And they know that Duryodhan is, has tried to kill them on more than one occasion. And they know that Dronacharya is basically this corrupt kind of guy who's they have the background of all that stuff. And I think that that's something that hopefully the Mahabharata trilogy will help bring out for American audiences when it finds its way out in this part of the world.
Yeah. How many fucking pages is that?
Oh, it hasn't been typeset yet, so I don't really know.
How many words is it, or lines, or what? Yeah.
Well, you know what? I actually calculated that, and it was actually, I do it very tightly and efficiently. So it's actually a little bit less than the number of number of words in the shortest Game of Thrones. In fact, I can actually tell you.
Oh, the novel. The novels.
The novel, in the shortest one. I wish I. Let me actually, 1 second.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so the whole trilogy remains short. I'm writing to my publisher here. The whole trilogy remains shorter than the shortest volume of the Game of Thrones series. So it is just shorter than that.
Okay. All right. So it's an epic, but it's a manageable epic, I guess.
It is manageable. I made sure that it was manageable. Like I wanted to make sure that someone could pick it up and like read it and get the full story.
Yeah. Is it, and this the Gita's in verse, is the whole Mahabharata in verse, or is it
the whole original one is, but my version is in prose. It's only the Gita portion that is a sort of a repetition, a mirror image of the actual Gita, but not a translation of it, but like a replication of it. That's in verse, but everything else is in prose.
Probably for, I mean, as you talked about in the introduction to this, that like we, as with essays, we probably are more at ease receiving a big novelistic story in novel form, in prose form.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's just how people process it, and that's how people enjoy it.
That was this week's show. You could find me, as always, at sleerickets@gmail.com, and Amit Majmudar is on Twitter at Amit Majmudar, I'm pretty sure, and a whole bunch of other places. I will include links in the show notes. Thank you all for listening, and with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.